this before starting interviews, but it's okay. It's part of
It's part of the deal, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, it's all part of the one being anyway.
You ever notice when as soon as you hit go, all that often just disappears? Does it do that for you once you're
Yeah, somewhat,
engaged?
especially if I'm like not in charge of the tech, but right now I'm in charge of the tech, so it's a
That's a
little
different world. Yeah.
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 Okay, so it looks like we are streaming now. We are now live on Facebook with Adyashanti. This is the interview for the upcoming Awakening issue of Meditation Magazine, which is very exciting. Our recent issues, if you've been following along, there's the health issue was focused on the individual health. Then the earth issue expanded the sense of self outward to the earth, and then the universe issue expanded it further to the universe and all that there is. And then the love issue kind of dove into the love aspect of everything. And now the awakening issue is our most requested issue upcoming, and Adyashanti is one of our most requested interviewees for this issue. So I'm excited to be talking to you today, Adyashanti.
Thank you, Kevin. Nice to be with you. Really nice.
Thank
And everybody.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. And yeah, if anybody is watching live, they are free to comment questions, and hopefully we can get to some of the questions at the end. So, Adyashanti, I've been watching your videos since I don't want to say I was a kid, but I was I guess just starting out on my journey, right at the beginning of my journey.
Yeah.
I was just coming out of a very sort of dark existential crisis. I had been a religious Jewish person and lost my faith in belief, in belief in
Yeah.
general.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I came out of that, I was like a nihilist, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I found meditation, and people like you and Eckhart Tolle and others were really instrumental in helping me climb out of like a very deep nihilistic depression and anxiety into a life of bliss and happiness that comes from being in touch with that which is reality, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Just the beauty of it. So, and for one thing, I particularly appreciate your approach of being very clear and not overly mystifying things, like being really clear about things. So
Yeah. I
I
try
just
to
wanted to
be.
really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your that really quick synopsis of your journey, because I think there's something in it that's pretty universal. A lot of people get into this after, going some sort of disillusionment in their life, whatever that is. A lot of people come into spirituality through that doorway. It's a painful doorway, but it's probably the most common.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that little synopsis, because I think it's your own unique individual journey, but it's also sort of reflective of how a lot of people get into this,
Yeah.
what pulls them and draws them in. Yeah.
That's
Often when belief starts to crumble is
Yeah.
an often a painful but very, very powerful entry point.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't realize it at the time, but it
Of
was a
course.
very important thing in my life.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, we always like to start these kind of interviews with a meditation. So
Wonderful.
would you lead us in something awakening related?
Yeah. Let's just take maybe 5 minutes or so, and I just want to invite everybody just to be settled. So what I like to do is, we all have our whole, whatever our background is, we've learned about meditation, right? Whatever we think that is, or whatever that is for you. And let's just see for a moment, just for a few minutes, if all of us, myself included, if we can just sort of just put all that learning down for just a moment, of what meditation is, how it's supposed to go, what the goal is, what our mind states, all that. And we're letting that go so we can actually enter into a more direct and intimate connection with our experience, which is really what meditation is. So I like to start just by, because so often we can be top heavy, kind of up in our minds, and a lot of the day requires us sometimes to be there. So in meditation, Just as soon as we sit down, just, when you exhale that, if you follow the energy of that, it's just sort of a descending, grounding energy just in the exhale. The feeling of the exhale is like as if you're just putting everything down for just a moment. Just putting everything down. And just letting that breath take you down into the lower part of the belly, the way babies and young kids breathe before we get a little too top heavy. Breathe, their stomach moves even more than their chest. So we're just relaxing back into this very natural way of breathing. Nothing special, nothing contrived. Just letting your attention kind of rest in your belly for a moment. Just feel it. And there's no correct experience to be having right now. Whatever you're having is perfectly fine. Now, whether we know it or not, when we sit down and meditate like this, we're actually sitting right down in the middle of an immense mystery. And that mystery is each of us. What are we really? Who are we really? And so in meditation, we're taught wisely often to let our thoughts kind of come and go and not get too attached to our narrative, and just whatever the mental narrative of the moment is. But I want to add something to that, because this isn't really just about kind of clearing thoughts. And if we're orienting in meditation towards our true nature, towards awakening, we're engaging in the mystery of our own being. As I said, when we meditate, we're taught to let go of our tight holding on to our thoughts or identifying with our narrative, all that sort of mental structure. We're just kind of not trying to push it away or get rid of it. We're just relinquishing any grasping to it. Why are we doing that? At least in the context of awakening. We're doing that so we can access our true nature, something that's not imagined in our mind, that's not an identity that we have to think into existence, but is something that's sort of innate, absolutely innate. So we're letting go of the thoughts and whatever our narrative of the moment might be, so we can get down deeper them. And just notice, as we're in this more relaxed state, even the language we use when we talk about my mind, my thoughts, my hopes, my dream, my meditation, whatever it might be. And so there's the thoughts, and then there's what we'll say, mine, my thoughts. Now, whether that's true, they're my thoughts or not, we'll leave that alone for a moment. But even the way we language this kind of is a kind of a confession that there's me and there's my thoughts. And they're not exactly the same, because thoughts are always coming and going and changing, and there's something underneath that matrix. Not something we have to look for as if we're looking for a needle in a haystack. When you're meditating, you're looking for something very specific. We're not doing that sort of hyper focus, almost the opposite, opening your attention vast. And maybe you just start to get those hints, that first intuition or feel that underneath our whole narrative, whatever we're identified with and attached to, which human beings do, but underneath that is just this clear, crisp awareness. Don't try to understand it or conceptualize it. Just sense, just awareness happening all by itself. Hearing my voice, what you're feeling, surrounding environment, all of it is taken in almost without effort. Awareness just shining. And so in this meditation, we just sort of have a moment where we just touch upon, or a kind of silent acknowledgement, like, yes, there is at this really deep or underlying, or it's just this shining awareness. And just stop with that just for a moment. Just being awareness. For a moment. Okay, and then I like to, it was taught from my teacher, even though we've only been meditating maybe 5 minutes or so. My teacher, she taught me that, when the bell rings, we don't have a bell, but we'll pretend, well, let's have a little bell. There we go. That first bell, just kind of let your body rock side to side just a little bit, because it's just sort of reorienting your consciousness to, like, here in the body, you're in a room, you can open up your eyes when it feels comfortable, but take it slow. We're not rushing. Just what is it like, that transition from the inner of meditation? We open our eyes, now we're engaging with the world around us. And yet maybe we can retain some of that connection to that inner quiet, and even as we're engaged in this dialogue together, in this exploration together, exploring from this deeper place, I have found to be much more powerful, actually, than if we're just thinking it through in our minds. Yeah. So that's just a little beginning, let's say, to get us sort of grounded.
Thank you for that beautiful meditation. That was very powerful, and I think it will lead us into this conversation in a very powerful way. So I want to first just check to make sure that the stream is working. Yes, it is. Okay, all the tech is working. This is sometimes I just have to
Wonderful.
check it, because I'm doing the conversation and I'm doing the technology. So
modern Dharma, my friend.
Yeah.
Do what you got to do.
Yes, it's all part of that experience of reality,
isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the anxiety and everything all together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to get into that more in a few minutes. And I know that I love how you took us so deep right at the beginning here, and it gets me into some of the deeper questions that I wanted to ask you. But I want to start out with some more surface level questions, because
Right.
There are a lot of spiritual teachers that don't get sort of precise in definitions.
Yes.
And I've noticed that's one of the things that I like about your teaching is that you tend to value precision, and tend to be precise about things. And I think that's really important in our day and age, because I think that science is a big way that things move into our culture here. You know,
Yeah.
ideas, knowledge, and understanding and wisdom
Yeah.
moves into this Western world that we're living in through the gates of science. And the scientists, there's nothing that scientists hate more than an ill-defined term.
Right. Right.
So,
Right. And it's important. That's why at least I make an attempt to be as clear as I can, because there's a lot of confusion in spirituality and a lot of terms that are used in very different ways, but almost as if they're all used the same way, but they're really not. So I
yeah.
do think and even though I'm often talking about getting underneath the conceptual mind and all that, I'm a huge fan of really clear thinking. I think if your mind understands what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're going about it, I found it can kind of go like, okay, we do have these Western minds that want to understand, that probably aren't just going to accept everything on faith, nor should they. So I think it's really good. It's important to understand what we're doing, so then we can kind of let that go and
Yeah.
move on. But that's such an important base to start
Yeah.
from, I think.
It's a funny part of the path that we have to start with thinking sometimes,
Isn't it?
beyond thinking.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so basically, I think sometimes the best way to define something is in relation to something else, as the yin and yang and everything, it defines each other. So I have a couple of word pairs to ask you about, like to define, like, for example, what is the difference between spirit and soul?
Oh, you're jumping. It's not such a simple question.
That's a hard one, right? I know, I'm trying myself.
Yeah. So I want to make this um, uh, as clear as I can. So we'll keep with that attempt.
Mhm.
I would think I'll use things like, say, spirit, almost synonymous with true nature, right? Soul, and in that sense itself, it's there's a level of experience, let's say, of our true nature of experience that's universal. Like, oh my gosh, we're all underneath even in the midst of our human uniqueness and idiosyncrasies and personalities. Wow, we're all the same, whatever we want to call that, spirit, true nature, you manage it, right? But so that's a very universal kind of consciousness. But there's also the soul, for me, would be that sort of individualized aspect of true nature, right? In each person. So the true nature might be there's a paradox, right? It's the same, and it shows up with a extreme amount of diversity and uniqueness. And I think that's, for me anyway, without getting into something more abstract or philosophical, that to me is really the soul, the individualized version of
Yeah.
true nature, of spirit.
Oh, okay, cool. So just to kind of try to put that into my own words,
Yeah,
yeah, you could kind of see both of these as consciousness in some way.
absolutely.
And just to put it into like the Hindu or Sanskrit way of saying it, so soul would be like the Atman, and the spirit would be more like the Brahman, like the universal consciousness. Is that
That works for me. That
okay?
works for me too. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. Yeah. I
Yeah.
know that these things are hard to define, and I won't hold you strictly to these definitions. I'm just trying to get some clarity, trying to see if we can define our terms before we get into the deeper stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So awakening and enlightenment, what's the difference between those two things?
Awakening is our experience of enlightenment. Okay, so let me just give you a little more description of what I mean by there. Like, an awakening is a moment where right, a kind of a perceptual shift, understanding. That's putting it very mildly, but I don't like to oversell things. I'd rather undersell them, right? Because there's a lot of hype in spirituality. But but awakening, it feels, and the reason that the word awakening is used is because it feels very much like that when you wake up in the morning, or really like when you wake up from a dream in the middle of the night. And the dream we wake up is who we thought we were, right? Now that awakening come like a snap, like snapping your finger. It might last 5 seconds, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, who knows, right? Enlightenment, at least as I see it, I don't see enlightenment as, I don't have an endpoint, right? So I think enlightenment is endless and ongoing. But the paradox is at each point, it's totally full. Let me make this a little bit clearer. It's because these are challenging issues. Let's say you put your finger, you walk up to an elephant, you put your finger on the elephant. You go, okay, now I know what an elephant feels like. I've never touched one, and I'm touching the elephant, right? So no matter where you're touching it, you're still touching the elephant, right? And so in that sense, you're connecting with the whole thing. And yet, and you feel that's, awakening and enlightenment. I don't even like to think of enlightenment as in terms of, I kind of use enlightenment and awakening fairly interchangeably, even though they're not the same thing exactly. Let's just say awakening is that aha, right, moment. Enlightenment is what we recognize. It's the field that we enter, the domain that we enter, right? So I know that's very a sort of untraditional in one sense, because we often think of enlightenment as this sort of fixed thing, right? Or I have an enlightenment experience. Someone say I have an awakening experience or an enlightenment experience, either one of those. But there's a tremendous amount of difference in depth and maturity, and enlightenment would probably refer more to the depth and maturity, whereas awakening would be like, wow, there it is, right? Where we have our glimpses, whether it's the first glimpse or 100th glimpse, each one of those glimpses always feels like you just woke up from something.
Yeah.
Enlightenment is kind of like what you wake up to, the unified field, right? Oh, it's all connected. It's all one. We're strangely nothing and everything, nobody and somebody at the same time. Like, wow, that's almost like, so I think of enlightenment almost more like a field of realization, rather than like a static state that you come to.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. That's very deep. I'm definitely gonna go through that a bunch of times before I end up writing the article. I'm gonna try to really wrap my head around things, I always find these pearls of wisdom after the interview when I dive into it more deeply. Yeah, it's because it's hard when I'm talking and doing the interview. Sometimes it's hard to fully wrap my head around it, but then afterward it becomes more clear on rewatching.
Sure.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And the last word pair here is awareness and consciousness, and some people use it synonymously, some people don't. So I was just wondering about you.
I will use it synonymously until I'm at a certain depth, then I start to distinguish them. So when I'm generally awareness, consciousness, same. If I'm really getting specific, right down in the weeds into deeper experience, and this is just the way I use these terms. If we think consciousness is almost always upon contact, or we think of states of consciousness, right? Our consciousness can change from happiness to sadness to connectedness to disconnected. These are all states of consciousness, right? And so consciousness is moldable, changeable, never really standing still in the way I'm using it, right? That's always an important qualifier, because other people might use it different. Awareness, in the way I use it, is it's not changing. It doesn't go through different states. It's not the same as a high state or a low state or a blissful state or any other state. It's the awareness of those states. So in a certain sense, the way will use awareness when I'm really getting, precise about it, is awareness is kind of also off. It's off of any kind of becoming. It's just aware, and we're experiencing this awareness continually. For all the searching we do for it, I often say to people, it's not a special thing. Go towards your garden variety awareness. Let's crack that open. Don't go for wild states of consciousness. Those are out there. But the real enlightenment part, that has to do more with the awareness part. The states of consciousness are sort of show us potentialities and all sorts of amazing things. But yeah. So I think, or you could think of awareness as like the sun shining, right? It's just there. It's always there. Consciousness this is kind of a silly, metaphor to use, but almost be like a flashlight, and we can shine it at different things, do different things with it. But the whole time we're fiddling around with our flashlight, there's the sun, just illuminating the whole thing, right? So when I'm being precise, that's how I'll distinguish those two.
Yeah. Wow. So, just to try to like put it into my own words to understand. So like consciousness would be more like, first, like the flashlight is directional, like rather than omnidirectional or, yeah. So like directional. So it's consciousness is focused on something or is of something specifically.
Or it's having a specific experience. Like you've probably heard enlightenment is not an experience, even though we are always talking about experience. And the reason they're saying that is because it's not necessarily a higher or lower consciousness thing. It's the awareness of all that, right? And the awareness, like right now, your awareness, my awareness, everybody that might be listening to this now or anytime in the future, the awareness that's just here, that's just, it's constant, isn't it? It's like the sun. And then within that, even right now, you, me, anybody listening, our state of consciousness inside of ourselves is mercurial. It's always changing, right? You might get a little excited. You might go, I'm not so sure about that idea. Those are modulations in our consciousness. And yet awareness is just shining the light on all of that. Both of them are very important, right? But
yeah. So
yeah.
and so aside from being directional versus omnidirectional, it also seems like it's the consciousness is also a little bit more of like a limited kind of thing, like an Atman type of thing, whereas the awareness is more universal, like broad, like underlying everything, like the Brahman type of thing.
Yes.
Does that make
And
sense?
since you're using the terminology like Brahman and stuff, one of my favorite old spiritual teachers, it's no longer with us, Nisargadatta, had a wonderful way of putting this. It was stark, but he said, look, when you die, your everything is associated with consciousness stops. It's the awareness that's continuing.
Wow, that's a really powerful way to put that. I love that.
Which actually I think has a lot to do with our instinct of fear too, about death, to the extent our consciousness is in our consciousness, that as we're defining it here, right? Not for how everybody defines it, then it's terrifying because we have an intuition. We know that's coming to an end. And that's scary, right?
Yeah, that is scary.
Yet there's the awareness of that. Yeah, that's another way to, there's lots of ways to think about it. So I try to throw out enough, almost like images and see which one sticks for somebody, right? Which one goes, oh, okay, now I'm kind of getting this.
That's beautiful.
Now, if you go to India and they start talking about pure consciousness, now then they're kind of using that in the way that I'm using the word awareness.
Right. Yeah.
Right? When they do distinguish consciousness and pure consciousness. Often it's described philosophically. Pure consciousness is consciousness without an object, subject or object, I might add. But that's great. But I think it's a little philosophical from where most people are. I'm trying to
Yeah.
go at this a little more experientially than
Oh, I
philosophically,
get that.
you
I
know.
get that. Yeah, just that this part of the conversation for me was like defining the terms, and sometimes you have to get a little philosophical to be able to define
Of
terms like
course.
precisely.
Mhm.
But
Can I say one last thing, Kevin,
oh, yeah,
while we're
of course.
doing this? I
Oh
would
yeah.
really invite anybody that like hearing this, we can hear it almost like you're listening to a lecture in a class. You just take in the information. Or as you're listening, you can be looking inside yourself going, okay, what's my experience of awareness? What's the consciousness thing? Yeah, like participating, right? That's what I always hope that we're all participating together, right? So, because then otherwise we just go home with a bunch of ideas in our mind, which might be useful, but I think it's way more useful for really diving in and participating in. Because then we're seeing for ourselves, does this fit my experience? Does it seem relevant? Does it even seem true? And we're really staying connected, you know? I think it's just really important part of all
Yeah,
this.
thank you. Thank you. I actually I would describe that as like watching an exercise video where you're trying to learn how to exercise versus actually doing
Yes.
the exercises along with it. You'll
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
doing the exercises is much better.
Yeah.
So yeah, like looking into what is this awareness that I'm experiencing? What is this consciousness? I mean, what is this I that's experiencing?
Yeah.
But we'll get into that in a second. I
Okay.
don't want to jump to that right away because that's a
Okay.
deep one. Okay, right. I've been guilty of using consciousness and awareness in a way that I think is not so precise.
Mhm.
And I think, like you were saying, when they in India, where they use consciousness versus pure consciousness, and pure consciousness really is what we're talking about, what we're calling awareness. But um, I think that Nisargadatta's like description or definition, I think, is a very strong one. I think
Mhm.
I think at least for me, I'm going to try in the future to stop using the word consciousness to refer to that universal Brahman type consciousness, and start using the word awareness for it. Just in my own practice to try to be more precise. So yeah, so for me, this I'm hoping that type of precision as we move forward into the future is going to help with the scientific study of these
Yeah.
types of things. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, okay, thank you for engaging in that analytical stuff with me. I know that's not so
I,
much fun sometimes.
I don't mind it at all, my friend.
Okay,
I can go philosophical with the best of them. So
yeah, thank
I
you.
don't
But
mind it.
I think we both we enjoy more just diving into that deep
Yeah.
sea of oneness.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But I want to
And we're
ask.
doing that, by the way. We're doing both. You can do a philosophical exploration. That's part of kind of a little bit what's going on too. But we can do that from an experiential basis. And actually, I hope that's actually what we're trying to model right here, right?
Yeah,
You can use your
that's true.
mind,
Mhm.
but really have it connected and referring back to that connection so it just doesn't start to get lost in its own little abstraction. You know?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's so powerful and important for us to remember that we are this oneness, even when we
Yes.
are thinking and distracted, and even when we forget that we are the oneness, we still are it.
Absolutely. Right. If
Yeah.
it's all one, it's all one period, no matter what.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one, well, when these conditions are met.
Yeah.
No, even
So
when your mind's going a little nutty and you're having a tough day and nothing's going right and you feel about as enlightened as a stone or whatever it is, at the end of the day, that's as much life, existence, suchness as anything else. It's, as human beings, we don't prefer to be in that state, but we never get away from reality. But boy, can we experience that we do,
mm,
right? We can
yeah.
really feel like we do.
Yes. Okay. Perfectly leading into this next question. Okay. These are some questions that I specifically have for the magazine issue. So there's a little bit more surface at the beginning. We'll dive deeper in a minute. So, what does spiritual awakening feel like?
Hmm. Well, first of all, it does feel like waking up, like literally from sort of a dream. And because it is, we're waking up from the dream that we've constructed of ourselves, right? It doesn't mean like we don't exist or something. It just means we don't exist as the construct in our mind. And boy, when awareness or consciousness wakes up out of that, it feels like when you wake up in the morning. And it usually feels like an immense relief. I remember for me, it felt like I just put down a 150-pound backpack that I didn't even know I was carrying all my life. It becomes so habituated. I think that's a lot of, psychological, emotional weight, all these things, a sense of lightness, of expansion, of appreciation, I think, for as much as, spirituality can sometimes seem almost life denying because we're, letting go of thought and disattachment and not grasping this and all this stuff, it can start to feel life. But if it goes right, it's not pointing us into a life denying place. It's actually almost the opposite, a profound intimacy, connection with life. Yeah, that's about as close as I could come.
Yeah, thank you. That's a beautiful description. Would you say that is like synonymous with happiness, or is it different from happiness?
It's different from the happiness as we normally conceive it and probably even experience it, because most of our happiness has a cause, right? I'm happy because this happened. That's fine. I get happy from causes all the time. But the happiness that comes from our true nature, it's an uncaused joy. It seems to be just an innate aspect of our being, of our depth, that there is a certain joy. I haven't done this for a while, but I used to express it all the time as, for me, it was kind of like a serene joy. And is like a serene joy. For other people, there's always little different human permutations of how it feels and is experienced. But, so there's a commonality, but there's also this little uniqueness. So my unique version of it would be something like serene joy.
Yeah,
that's
serene joy is a good word for it. I think that there's a term in French, it's called joie de vivre.
Yes.
French, so maybe I'm pronouncing it badly, but like the joy of life, of being alive.
Yes. Yeah.
And I feel like that's what it is. It's like underneath all of the thoughts, underneath all the beliefs and ideas and preferences, there's like a fundamental joy of being alive, being conscious.
Yeah.
Embedded there.
Yes.
They in the yogic way, they phrase it in Sanskrit, Satchidananda. I'm not sure if you're aware of that phrase. I'm sure you are.
I am.
Satchidananda is like existence, consciousness, bliss. It's all one thing. It's like all one fabric, like the existence itself and the consciousness and the bliss. It's all one thing.
Yeah. It's a great it sounds so philosophical, but it's actually, it just sounds so much like some guy, some girl sitting around 1,000 years ago going, how do I communicate this experience, right? Something I'm feeling, a perception of life. Hey, this might be a nice little synopsis, way to do that. And
or like a brand name for their type of meditation. So some
maybe so, right?
An early enterprising mystic called Satchidananda meditation. Yes,
right.
I'm
sure it's been done.
Yeah. But it's a beautiful thing. I guess happiness is a little bit of a vague word. I think a lot of our words in English are not as precise as those Sanskrit words.
Right.
That Sanskrit so precise in that way, at least in the nature of consciousness, and these spiritual concepts. In here in the West, we have these very precise terms for like matter and all these different forms of matter and all that stuff. But over there they had all these much more precision in the spiritual world, you could say. So I guess happiness.
Language.
I guess happiness is going to be too vague for us to define, but I guess.
But happiness is okay, just like as a place setter or something, a placeholder. Like, it is. It's not the garden variety happiness, like the cause. I'm happy because of this. It's just happiness that comes out of existence itself, but I'm okay with the word happiness too. That works for me.
Yeah, I like it. I have a friend who's a Zen teacher, and he doesn't like, he says, just like when you're talking about meditation, don't tell people that they're going to be happy. And
Mhm.
he kind of thinks of it in the way of equanimity, like
Yeah,
being at peace. But that if you tell people that they're going to be happy, then they think that they're always going to be in the state of happiness. But I do say
right.
it makes people happy because it makes you happier in a different way, not in that dependent way.
Right. Of course, I get the teacher's, hesitancy in the sense you make anything a standard and then everybody's chasing that in meditation, looking for something, or they're trying to feel really, really happy when actually, you're aiming at something. You're not aiming at happiness. That's the thing. You aim at happiness is kind of a pretty good way to be unhappy.
Yeah.
Not entirely. There's things we can do that are helpful, but yeah, we don't want to be aiming at some experience that we've conceived and then we have in our mind, and then we're, driving towards that, which is what like almost all of us do when we start, right?
Yeah.
We almost can't help that, but as we get a little more mature with it, or a little more experience with really looking into this, we realize, well, no, this isn't just about. This is something far deeper even than happiness, as wonderful as that is.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
pivotal. It's, as we've said earlier, that at the end of the day, the deeper realms of enlightenment aren't really defined by experience, period. But that doesn't mean there's no experience, right? It's not like we're dead. It's just kind of like your friend, it's like a way of saying, hey, don't make this just about the pursuit of experiences,
Mm, yeah. I want to come back to this topic of goal orientedness
Yeah.
versus like passive like grace, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
But first I want to dive into this question that is really, I think, very core to a lot of what you've taught in the past and currently. And that question is like, who are you really? Right? So who are you really?
Yeah.
Do you want to take a crack at that before I like be more detailed in the question?
You can go and be too, Dale.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask a very
Can I
simple.
do, well, I will do something.
Yes,
I'll do a quick visual. How about that? Because I like
yes,
visuals.
me too.
This is a way of like, I'm just diving right in, my friend. So we're just diving into like, how do I work with that? Do I just sit around thinking, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? No, there's a way to, here's one way to think, and you can use this as a visual. You put your hand out. I want to stay on camera. We start out here. Who? M. Now we're getting closer.
Hmm.
I.
Hmm. Hmm.
One more step without words.
Hmm.
Who? It's almost like, because the question is presented by the mind into the mind, that's who. So it's a little bit out here, right? We can talk about our thoughts. M. Okay, now we're getting more personal, more intimate. And now I. How can we get more personal than that, right? What is I? And then what if I just took the last step?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's
So I'm just trying to give a, because I think it's, the inquiry questions are important, but at least as important, if not more, is how we actually engage with them, right? How do I work with this?
yeah.
That's what I wanted to get right up front, like, how do we
Yeah.
do this? How do we do
Yeah,
it?
no, that's powerful. It reminds me of a another visual that you used, which was probably my favorite visual I've ever heard for this question of who am I, which was it's like an eyeball trying to see itself, and the
Yeah.
eyeball is asking like, who am I? Where am I? Can you show me?
Yes.
And then it's like you're saying, where do you point the eyeball to look? Like
Right.
over there, over there, over there, nowhere. There's you can't look at itself because it is the one looking, it's the seeing.
Exactly. Right. I used to use it in terms of your feet. What if your feet forgot who they were and they went on a long journey to find themselves? How far would they journey? along the path before they would get to right, because they're looking for themselves. And that's the weird thing of this, right? We treat it as if it's out there, right? We're going somewhere, when actually, yeah, what would you say to your eyes if they were looking for themselves, or your feet if they were looking for themselves? You would say, hey, just stop for a moment. Stop going somewhere. Don't take the next step. Don't enter the path for just a moment. Let's just see what's actually here, right? What's really going on here. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Another
then,
one, the last one I'll show the do is, I did who am I. Sometimes I'll also go I am who,
huh,
and then just like as a meditative, then you just dwell in that just that question mark. It's like a mystery, but let it be light. Don't say, we don't have to take it all heavy and just like wow, what's more extraordinary than that mystery of our being? And just dwell in that. And then when the time's right, couple minutes, 30 seconds, who knows when, if your mind gets distracted, then you start again. I am who?
hmm,
But with actual interest, right? This can't be a mechanical like thing. I'm just going to ask this question and I hope something lovely happens. We really do need to be interested.
yeah, yeah.
Really, we've really got to want to know.
Yeah, I want to come back to that, like the the driver of that interest also, but
Yeah.
first, so when you were talking about the eyeball looking at itself and the feet looking for themselves,
Yeah.
so the you asked where would you point it, right? So
Yeah.
when I think about it, it's like, okay, obviously you're not going to see it with your seeing, like if you're an eyeball, you're not going to see yourself, but
Right.
maybe you have some like interoceptive, like some introspective process of feeling yourself, like if maybe there's some nerves in the eyeball and the eyeball can feel itself or the feet can feel themselves.
Mhm.
And I think that in the Buddhist traditions, there's a lot of that body awareness type of stuff.
Yeah.
Like the Vipassana's body scans and
Mhm.
watching the sensations of the breathing and everything that is body oriented is like feeling into yourself. So is that is that a way that you could find yourself if you were an eyeball looking for yourself, if you know what I mean?
I think if you're an eyeball looking for yourself, every means that you attempt, the path is every attempt that you do to apprehend yourself and is a failure.
Mm.
The whole idea is to fail completely, but only for a moment,
Mm. Yeah.
just completely. Like I can't, yeah, your eye can't reach around and grasp it, it can't do a U-turn and get a look at itself or grasp itself, but it can and this is where conceptual understanding can be useful. There can be an understanding where it goes, oh, I get this. At least I understand. My eye can't turn and look at myself. How could I get apart from me to get a look at me? Like it's never going to happen like that ever. I'm not going to see myself like I see a tree or a rock or a bird. Okay, I understand that. So then we can stop doing that. And maybe that little U-turn of consciousness looking for itself starts to kind of just relax back here. And what's it like just seeing, just the seeing, not trying to look at your looking, that's impossible. Just the seeing, or just you like the consciousnessing or the awarenessing, but getting, even though at the end of the day it's not a feel, it transcends all feeling, but we can use our bodies and we can use our sense of things as a powerful tool. Like what's your sense of awareness? What's your sense of your eyes looking when they're not trying to turn and look at themselves? Just stop right in that. What's that feel like? Yes, we don't going to get caught in the feeling, but boy, the feeling can really help orient us, right? Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm a real fan of, this is something I got from my teacher in Zen of, so you say, this is a body oriented practice. And I remember thinking, what? We're just sitting here doing nothing. But then over time we're actually working with experience. We're paying real attention and all that's body stuff, right? And we at any point we can sort of transcend that sort of body awareness, but the body is one of the most powerful means to do that, paradoxically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
It is.
our experience certainly is one of the most efficient means of doing that.
Yeah. It's a very, very deep thing.
Yeah,
There's so many deep paths I can go in there,
isn't
but
there?
I want to ask you this. So, when you do that inquiry of who am I,
Yeah,
and they call it neti in the
yeah.
yogic paths. Um, you're not supposed to find an answer, or maybe you're not supposed to find an answer, or maybe you are supposed to find an answer. I'm not sure. But so I've heard you say that you shouldn't try to find an answer, but then you also talk
No,
about
you want to find an answer. It's just not
I
a nice conceptual answer.
oh,
Whatever the conceptual answer is, isn't going to be the answer. It's like if I walked up to you, Kevin, and I said, "I'll tell you what, I got an apple in your hand, and I've heard you've never had an apple, my friend. Here's an apple. But you know what? I got a PhD in apples. Let me tell you everything I know about an apple." And after I told you everything I know about an apple, would it give you the slightest feeling of sweetness or crispness or calories or anything? Not that that description isn't useful. It can be very useful for certain things. But you see this gap between even a really precise, almost scientific description, as useful as that can be, and an apple?
hmm,
That description will never crunch. It'll never save anybody's life with calories. It's useful, but it's not the apple,
yeah, yeah.
right?
So
And there's something about us like that.
yeah, so basically, it's not that you're not supposed to find an answer at all. It's that you're
Right.
not supposed to find a conceptual answer. You're supposed to find the answer of that which is, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's revelation. You're supposed to find revelation. That's what
Okay.
awakening is, right? That's aha. And but the funny thing is when you really get aha, be very careful, because even when you're in a state of clarity, a sort of awakened clarity, it's easy for your mind to come up with its new concepts, which is fine. We're always going to conceptualize our experience if we're talking about it. We don't have any other choice, really. But I've seen this before with sometimes, not that people are thinking this through consciously, but it's almost like I've had an awakening, so my thoughts are more true than they used to be. Right?
Yep, yep.
Be
That's definitely,
careful. No, they're just as untrue as they were beforehand.
yeah,
You know what I mean? So yeah, we'll use our concepts like awareness or consciousness or spirit or true nature, but I use those as things that help orient your experience in the right direction. That's how I'm using them.
hmm,
Right? I don't care if somebody agrees, disagrees, because I'm not using it that way. I'm not philosophizing. I'm just using it to orient
yeah,
our attention.
yeah.
And whatever helps orient attention the best, I'm all for that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important for us to realize when we try to communicate these things, anybody who's trying to communicate these things, when we make it into something that's ontological or philosophical, or
Mhm.
it's missing the point.
It's
And
missing the point. And let's just remember that when we're talking about, say, deep spiritual experience, it's no different than any other experience, right? Like I said, all the descriptions of an apple aren't going to give you the taste of an apple.
mm,
So even though we're talking about it in the terms of, yeah, you can't describe it at the end of the day, and it starts to sound very mysterious and different from everything else in the world, but actually it's like everything else in the world.
mm. Just like you can't.
Everything will evade our descriptions, even as we struggle to have the best descriptions we can possibly have. So if we remember that, then the descriptions, they're like just as an orienting tool, and it's not, and we don't actually believe it.
Yeah, we got to taste the apple.
You got it. The taste of the apple, that's what it's about. Then how you talk to yourself about that apple taste will vary background, culture, tradition, who knows what.
And
An atheist will talk about it in atheist ways, and a true believer will talk about it in true believer ways. And so they go. Secular person that has an awakening will have secular ways, and a religious person will talk about it in religious ways. I've just seen all this, and the beauty is that the awakening, it doesn't play by the rules. You can be walking down the street. I had a lady in Canada many years ago who came to me because she was in a softball game, and her self totally disappeared. And she was, one with everything. But as sometimes can happen, it was a little overwhelming for a while. And she came to me. She had never done spirituality. She could care less about spirituality, right? And then this thing happened. She comes to me and she says, Adya, can you turn this off? Well, no, but hey, let me give you the view of the field where you are, right? And that kind of helped, because then her mind could go, okay, at least I'm not going crazy, okay. But the nice thing is that she was a great example, right? This doesn't play by the rules. Awakening can happen to anybody at any time, regardless of background, regardless of what you believe. That doesn't mean, therefore anything goes, conceptually, but I find that comforting, right? Because there's no special group that has a that owns awakening. Certainly are groups of people that are pursuing it, and it's much more likely when we're doing certain practices and various things. But tonight, I just love that about our true nature. It just doesn't play by any of our conceptual, rule we come up with, or I've ever come up with. After 26 years of teaching, I can come up with numerous examples to the contrary. Of anything I would say.
That kind of spontaneity of arising of the experience, maybe that's how it evolved in our species. I wonder if other animals experience that too.
I guess how could you be pursuing it if you never even knew what it was, right? So at some point, clearly it just, oh my goodness, wow, this is a different way of seeing life. Wouldn't it be nice if some of my friends could see it that way? Or people anybody for that matter, like, wow.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by all that, and I wonder, I really do wonder if other animals have these types of experiences. But so I want to get into another deeper question about this sort of who am I? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is something I've been struggling. Well, I don't want to call it struggling because it's not really struggling. It's more like fun. I'm playing with this. Okay. So I've been playing with the concept of, well, these are concepts, obviously. The experience. I've been playing with the experience of Brahman versus Anatta or Anatman. So just to clarify for the audience. Okay, so Brahman is that sort of yogic, like Sanskrit, Hindu kind of concept of being one with everything. I am everything. I am this oneness, the oneness that we can't describe. And then in the Buddhist traditions, the Buddha kind of made a very strong statement that basically he said anatta or anatman.
Right.
There's no self.
Right.
The Buddha made this very strong statement as one of his core teachings.
Yeah.
And that goes, you could say it goes against the Hindu teachings, or you could try to fit it into. So a lot of people try to fit it. Well, maybe this is the right way. So a lot of people fit it into the Hindu teachings by saying that when the Buddha said there's no self, he was just referring to the individual self. And so if there is no individual self, then really we are Brahman. So it's really the same thing, just two different ways of saying the same thing. Or
they just disagreed, and that's part of life, and people disagree. Even enlightened beings disagree. On things. Totally. And that's diversity, Totally. I don't mean to just casually brush it off like that, because it's an important issue, certainly philosophically and stuff. And yet, again, we go back to people trying to give descriptions to their experience, right? So when the Buddha even to talk about no self, probably one of the most misunderstood teachings there is out there, right? Because we can, if the awakening is deep, it is the experience of not having a self. What does that mean, though? it's like not a fixed point of reference that's referencing a lot of the past, interpreting the present all endlessly through its concepts, right? So, how do you want to put this? So when the Buddha says that, there's no self or no soul, because he included that too, because that was in the mix of his time. And basically what he was saying is everything, and he didn't leave, nothing was left out. Everything is kind of a process. He used the term impermanent, which is a good term, but I think also a process. So even if we talk about our egos, or in spirituality, what we call the false self, and we say it's not really real, it's not really me, or whatever it is, it's not there as sort of it's not there in the way that it feels like it is. Like there's some sustained entity through all of my experiences, right? And what the Buddha was saying was something like, this is a simplification, but something like, no, there's not something just stable and all your experiences are coming into that, so that one receiving tower, or whatever, however you want to think about it, that the whole thing is processed through and through. Mm-hmm. So whatever self you have is actually, as we've said, it's a process. It's comprised of memories and ideas and beliefs and your life experience and your family of origin and all that. None of that has anything to do with a concrete entity, right? It's all process. So he's talking about the emptiness or the non-existence. I think he's really saying there's not this eternal, solid something or somebody there. What's eternal almost is the process.
Right. Yeah. So I don't want to get too caught up in the philosophers of the past, the Buddha.
Of course.
I want to make it like, this moment of experience.
Yeah.
So basically, but I'm just trying to give you a little background of why I came to this sort of question.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah. So when I had been in a Buddhist monastery in Thailand for some time. Yeah. And they were talking about anatta or anatman in very much the same way that you're talking about it. No permanent soul, no permanent self, no self that exists through time. It's all a process that's happening in each moment. And that was their interpretation of anatta and anatman. And
there's more to the story, however, by the way.
Yes, right. Yes,
that's not the end of the story.
Right. So recently I've been on this sort of journey, besides interviewing people for Meditation Magazine. The way that Meditation Magazine started was that I was traveling around the world interviewing gurus and teachers and people about spiritual awakening and enlightenment. That was the core question. And I got some really deep answers. And one of the things that I was talking to a lot of Buddhists who were talking like that, and then I started talking to some Hindu and yogic people in like India, and they were talking about spiritual awakening, not as like waking up into our present moment experience, but more into waking up to our true self, the Brahman that you could call it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought for a while, for years, I've been in this sort of like, oh, Brahman is so amazing, just being part of that, being that. Yeah. And that's been what I've been playing with for the past few years. But then recently, I came across this concept of ahamkara, which means self-making or I-making. Aham is a self, or I, and kara is like making or creating. So ahamkara is like this process that we do of making a self. So like we could make a self like this ego is myself, or then we say, oh, I'm not the ego, I'm the consciousness, the Atman. And then we say, oh, that's myself. And then we're like, no, I'm bigger than that. I'm this universal consciousness. And then it's like, oh no, wait, I'm bigger than that. I'm the everything, the oneness. So it's these sort of levels that of expansion, I guess you could say, of expanding from the ego to the consciousness to the universal consciousness to the oneness. And I thought when I encountered this word ahamkara, I making or creating an I, creating a self, I thought maybe that's what the Buddha meant when he was talking about no self. Like maybe he didn't just mean there's no soul here. Maybe he didn't mean that, but maybe he meant stop that whole process of identifying with things in general. And like, even when you get to that most ultimate level of Brahman, don't even identify with that and just be, without
Right.
being something.
That's the deeper no self thing. It's just you're not identifying that which is compelled endlessly, even after deep spiritual awakening experiences. Often there's that thing that's still trying to identify itself, but it's just going cosmic now, which is fine. That's part of the path. That's part of just our unfolding. And then at some point, that which has that kind of is compelled to define, even if it's in the highest spiritual state, that just drops off.
Yeah.
Then to me, then I go, okay, that's the core of the self, right? The thing that's always endlessly trying to find the right identity for itself. And we use that, right? We can't just dismiss it and try to do an end run around it. We're utilizing that, Yeah, what are you? What are you? What are you? What are you? As Nisargadatta, his whole entire teaching was just dwell in the sense of I am, and that'll get you to universal consciousness and connection and like all this stuff if you do it. And every once in a while, he'd just like sort of do the microphone drop, like at the end of that, he'd go, and what we're aiming for is beyond that. That's only going to be there as long as you're breathing. But that's the path. That's the path. And if we go, it'll just fall off. So, with my teaching, it's not important to me whatsoever, say that I'm conveying the Buddhist teaching or any, I'm all for like what works in people's experience. And what I've seen is also in each of us, teachings are dualistic by nature, even because language is dualistic by nature, right? And so it tends to not be totally inclusive. At least in my experience, there's something like, yes, there's no self, there's no longer at all that thing looking for identity or whatever. I don't know quite what to call the humanized version of what's left. I would be comfortable with a soul if we didn't have to project ideas of existing forever with it. Like whether it does or doesn't, we'll leave that alone. But that individualized aspect of the universal is important. I think I might be hearing you wrong, Kevin, but I think there's something about that I could hear, and I thought what you were getting at. Maybe not, but it's not quite as simple as any of these teachings make it seem like. It's not just as simple as no self. Well, walk up to somebody with no self and start asking them. You realize, well, they're about as unique of a person as anybody else is. You know what I mean? They're just not as hung up on it, So, I think what the Buddha's getting at there is a kind of final, eternal kind of reality. As soon as we can let that go, then we can start to entertain the ideas of, there's the universal, recognizing yourself as everything, and that's wonderful and beautiful. And there's also just the individualized version of the universal. And that to me that's just the most beautiful part of it in a way. You retain a certain kind of uniqueness, and you retain all the unity. They just aren't in conflict.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, this can sound kind of abstract for some people and, kind of deep or whatever. Look out your window. It's all life out there. It's all life, all existence. That's it. Big trees, small trees, this tree, that tree.
Yeah.
It's not that complicated, actually.
Yeah.
It's all around us. There's a tree, there's life looking just like a pine tree. And damn, that pine tree is going to look like a pine tree as long as it's there, right? It's not going to look like the rock next to it or the tree next to it. So in that sense, it's got its own, in its unique existence. But the pine tree is 100% life, right? It's composed of the same thing that everything else is composed of. So there's unity and uniqueness, and both are retained without the identity grasping either one of them.
Hmm.
Big self, small self, no self, universal self.
Yeah.
As long as the self's there, it's going to be doing that. When it's dropping away, you know,
Hmm.
why would it
Yeah.
be doing that? Just get on with life.
Hmm. Yeah. There was a story I heard that you told in a video I watched. Maybe it was an audio. I think it was with Sounds True. It was an interview that you did where you talked about an experience that you had where you looked around and everything was I, you know.
Yeah.
Even the toilet that you looked at was I, everything was I.
I tested it. I
Yeah.
specifically looked at the toilet, say,
Yeah.
let's see how well this works on that. Sure enough,
Yeah.
it worked.
Right. And so like to me, that's what, when they say, that the end of that neti neti process, that you discover that you are the ultimate self. So there is an experience of that you had, that experience that you had of looking around, everything is I.
Yeah.
So I try to play with these experiences because there's different ways of experiencing life. And that is one really powerful, beautiful way of experiencing. And if you look around and you realize everything is I, because we are all the oneness, we're just this oneness. I am this oneness. You look around and you feel that, it feels like unity and bliss. And also there's a personal aspect to it because it feels like everything is I. So there's still a self there. So what I'm saying is, if you take that state or that experience where everything is I, and you just remove the I, and then it's just everything is, it feels different to me when I do that.
It is a little bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels
It
a
is
little
a little bit
different.
different.
I can describe it because this is something that I've been playing with a lot. The difference is that when it loses that I and that personal aspect goes away. It's like an identification falls away. So like one layer of ahamkara identification falls away, and it's a thought that falls away. It's an idea that falls away. It's a belief that falls away. It's an idea that that there is something called I, that there, and that when that falls away, then instead of just experiencer, because that's really what you find in the Brahman, is just experiencer, is everything. I is everything. Instead of experiencer, that R falls off the end and it's just experience.
Yes, it's just experiencing. Yes.
Yeah. And
yes.
yeah, so I wanted to just kind of get your perspective on those two states, because they're slightly different experiences, obviously of the same thing, because it's the same reality, but slightly different ways of experiencing the same reality. And I wanted to get your take on, like, is one of those states like awakening and the other is not, or
No.
is
No, they're both. I would put them sort of in the category. I mean, they're not the same, right? But look, if part of awakening is wakening to unity, right? Because a unity experience has a little bit of I in it, we can't just discount the unity experience, right? So it's real and it's legitimate. And the thing there is development after awakening. Right? There's a lot after awakening. The thing is, but we're not going somewhere where we don't know. It's like you're just getting more and more and more and more used to the territory that you're in, or that you are. But there is, we do see more and get more and more clear and without end.
Yeah. So I guess my question, to be more
But I get
precise,
the I thing. It's totally different. Not
Yeah.
totally, but it is different because you
A
can feel
little.
there's just that little,
Yeah.
when that kind of stops, even if it stops briefly, at that
Mm.
you just realize like, oh, that was just unnecessary.
Yeah.
You might feel the old be compelled, like, but do I
Mm.
want to put an eye? And by the way, it's not like it's not like you'll never do that again. You see what I mean? It's not like
Yeah.
it's just that now that the foundation of it all is clear, and it's conscious,
Yeah.
right? And so, okay, so you use the I, or you can go back and go, what if that I, as the universal suchness of everything, like, oh yeah, that's still there to be experienced.
Mm.
And I realized there's something just a little click deeper than that.
Yeah. You don't
And
even need.
yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. So I guess my question is like this because if you look at sort of the history of those two states, right? So to me, it's like the Hindus kind of went toward that I
Yeah,
as the best state. And there are reasons why I can sometimes prefer the I
sure.
of Brahman over the no I of just experience,
Yes.
because it feels more warm. It feels more like personal. It feels more embodied,
Mhm.
and it feels more like love and bliss. So like those are
Yeah.
things that I feel more when I'm playing with the eye of being Brahman. And
Yeah.
then but then there's when I drop the eye and it's just experience, then there's like, to me, there's more peace, more rest,
Hmm.
more like relaxation, I guess, because you don't have to hold on to a sense of identity at all,
Hmm. Right.
and more clarity. Um,
Hmm.
and these are things that I see in like Buddhist masters,
Hmm.
so like when I can see in the Hindu masters, the yogic masters, they tend to have that warm, personal love
Yeah.
kind of energy. And then the Buddhist masters tend to have more that clear, peaceful, like Zen
Yeah.
kind of, if you want to call
Yes.
it.
Yes. Yes.
And I feel like that there's a reason. The reason is that the Hindu ones are pursuing that, not pursuing, but they're experiencing that I of Brahman, being
Hmm.
Brahman. And the Buddhist ones are just letting go of all I and just experience like impersonal, clear reality. So it seemed like if you look at the Buddha, he's like, this is better. Like it seems like he's like, no self, no
Yeah.
self. And then
Yeah.
the Hindu yogic people were like, yes, self is
Right.
good.
Right. Right.
so
Right.
so it seems like they
Yeah.
had this sort of like,
Yeah.
this one is better, or this one is better. And my question to you
Yeah.
is like, do you feel like one is better than the other, or like
No.
deeper, higher, truer, or anything like that?
No.
Hmm.
And I'm not even, and I don't, I mean, I get where your question's coming from. But the way I look at it now is it's map making,
Hmm.
right? A teaching is map making. My teaching, there's a map to it. As soon as you open your mouth, kind of, there's map making, and the map, and so the Buddha made a map that really corresponded to his experience. The Hindu made a map that corresponded to their experience. And of course, it kind of gets tricky because the maps can start to inform our experience. If we had the map in our consciousness for 30 years and we haven't experienced, there's a great likelihood that the map is going to be influencing that experience too, right? But they're all just part of the greater psyche, you might say, the greater human psyche, understood in its most expansive sort of
Hmm.
sense. But I understand exactly what you're saying. Like, I come from the Zen tradition. I've never liked Zen meditation halls. I would much rather have them be like Tibetans, right?
Hmm.
Because that just fits my personality, right? I like more color, and I'm a little more, I can be more exuberant, can be more passionate, and that's not reflected in a Zendo. Probably a good place for someone like me to have been for a while, because I didn't get caught up in all that. But there is every system, every path what I teach, everything. I don't think anything's excluded from this. I have never come upon a path that I think just sort of has something really profound to offer everybody in whatever state they might be in. That's just not what they're doing, right? And so there's so many paths because there's so many different ways of coming about this, and different people and the way they're hooked up.
Yeah, totally. The documentary series we filmed was called Paths Up the Mountain, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But I'm gonna stick to this topics that I wrote down, because this is what we want in the magazine for this
Good
issue.
for you. Keep
Yeah.
focused. All right.
So okay,
I might make it difficult on you unintentionally, but
no, it's
try to
great.
keep focused.
It's beautiful. It's really beautiful to dive deep into all these things. So to sort of wrap up that topic of the I versus the no I, the one of the things that I noticed is that it can kind of, in the moment of playing with it, I usually prefer the no I, because it feels like I've dropped doing something by identifying with Brahman. And that feels lighter and brighter in a certain way. But if I, over a long period of time, if I practice in that, then so if I practice in the I of Brahman, the being Brahman, being the oneness, you could say, like identifying as the self. Then even when I go into unconsciousness for a long period of time, let's say for a few days of anxiety, whatever things are happening, then when I realized that I'd gone into that anxiety and things, then I'm like, oh yeah, wait, don't worry. Like I'm like the oneness, like this is fine. But and like, even when I'm thinking and all that stuff, it's all Brahman. But then when I practice the other way, it's more like the experience, that blissful, beautiful, clear experience was gone for those few days. For me, at least, for this consciousness. And then I feel somewhat bad about it, like even though I shouldn't, I feel bad about it when I lose that. So I wonder if it can be helpful to be the I, to identify as Brahman in the long term, because it avoids that problem of preferring the state of clarity over the state of like unconscious thinking. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments about that, but that was just like something I realized this morning when I was.
It's one of the reasons. I mean, this might not sound really direct, but it's one of the reasons I ask people often, like, why are you here? What do you want specifically? Yeah, this is a pretty wild thing to be doing. You must want something pretty damn bad. So let's just admit what you're after and what you want. And I do that because I'm trying to orient, right? I don't want to shove every single person into the same box, because it just doesn't work for them, right? So when I'm listening to you and talking about sharing your experience, which I really like, right? Because it keeps it from being all in the clouds. I'm like, okay, like, if we were to have a deeper conversation, I don't have enough information to make a real, suggestion, not that you're even asking for one, but but it's so unique. And absolutely. So for instance, let's say somebody has had a lot of trauma in their life. Right? Let's just get into the weeds, because I see this all the time. Somebody that has, say, or some real difficulty, right? And so they have often some trust issues, some intimacy issues, intimacy in the sense of when you let your guard down, right? That can be terrifying to somebody who's been traumatized and stuff in that kind of state, right? So if I'm going to come up with someone in that state, right, I'm probably going to be going like, yeah, let's have a more orientation to that I, to the best version of that for now, right? Because we want to give you something It's all about timing. It's medicine, right? So if someone's despondent, they've just lost somebody in their life, life looks bleak and hopeless, and you're not necessarily going to hit that person with, well, let's just tear apart every belief you have today,
Yeah.
right? That's not a good day, right? It might not be good for, a year or two, who knows, right? So a different teaching. So if an I-oriented teaching like Nisargadatta, just dwell in the sense of I am. And because you're right, that can bring a sort of an invigorating, alive, but also a sort of embodied, like, yeah, here, I actually, even though there's universal, you get the feel, I count, right? And so someone that came from that background, I might have a little bit different, if I was working with them individually, a little different orientation. If somebody came to me and said, Adya, I just want the truth, man. Whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know why, but I just gotta know it. There's nothing I can do about it. Like, okay, then we're in a different arena now, right? You're doing okay. We're not having to kind of stabilize you as a human being, which a lot of people really need a lot of that support. Okay, now we're in a different realm. Now we can start taking the deep dives in a way that's a little safer.
Yeah.
See, so I'm kind of talking around. I know I'm not kind of talking around, but I'm trying to give a sense of why I kind of have I think a kind of a big view of teachings and approaches, because at the end of the day, it's a particular person in a particular room with themselves trying to utilize a particular teaching. Is that the right teaching for that person at that moment?
So it all comes
that's
down.
why and if a Hindu oriented thing works, by God, I'm going to use that. And if the more Buddhist oriented thing if that's where somebody is, let's use that. But let's not get caught, right? And let's not limit ourselves from what the world has given us. This immense variety of perspective and experience, even on the experience of oneness. Let's utilize all that. It's all medicine. Why would we keep most of our medicine cabinets closed and locked because they have a different name on them? Let's not just use them casually and haphazardly without knowing what we're doing. But it's one of the nice things about the world we live in today. We don't have to be so siloed into our little spiritual, yes, we want to be committed and stay with the practice, and not just be kind of spiritually promiscuous, you might say. But at the same time, there's a benefit to realizing, hey, yeah, and pay attention, right? Because it's not me, it's you. And I mean, anybody that's listening, it's you. You're the one that's going to be feeling, is this working? Right? It's what's going on with me? Like, how's the medicine going down? Right? You'll sense that and you'll feel that and you'll know that. And if it's not going down well, just remember there are other medicines out there in the spiritual toolkit. And I just really emphasize, because I can't tell you, Kevin, how many hundreds of people I meet that have just banged away at something that hasn't really worked for them, but they just think, well, an enlightened master said this is the way, and so it was the way for them and maybe some other people, but what's it for you? And you're the one that gets to make that decision, not somebody else. Don't put that in somebody else's hands, right? That's your life. Don't put it in a guru's hands to make those kind of decisions for you. Your life is yours. We're here, at least as I see it, to help along the way, almost like not a doula, but what's that when you help people give birth? The word, doula, but there's another thing too. Anyway, sort of, nursing along someone's what's innate for them. Does that make sense?
I can see that.
Rather than a cookie cutter, just boom, this is the way it is.
I tend to get caught up in ontology and in what is reality and things like that. What's real, what's true. And I get caught up maybe because of the background where I grew up, like really religious Jewish, and that was what their focus was on, like
Yeah.
what's true, what's real, what's like ontology.
Yeah.
So I sometimes I get caught up in that, but I like that you approach it not from that perspective, but from the perspective of I'm trying to help someone as a teacher, as a helper, a guide, a doula, like you said, or
Yeah.
a midwife or whatever.
Midwife, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, I like to think of myself as a spiritual midwife.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
I'm not going to give you the baby or create the baby or anything, but I might just kind of help you out there a little bit.
Right. And then it's all in service of that person's, I don't want to call it happiness, but I guess I do call it happiness in the service of that person's
Their own unfolding. Yeah.
unfolding or feeling better, enjoying their life more, being more tapped into reality, whatever it is. Yeah, so I like that a lot. So what that leads to my next question here, which is not in that same deep vein. It's a separate, it's like a little bit easier, I guess, less deep. But it's also important. So meditation teachers, spiritual teachers, I've seen a lot of people fall into a trap, which you haven't, as far as I can see. You don't fall into that trap, and you stay out of it better than most. Where they can feel like I'm teaching something to people, so I have to be perfect in embodying it. I have to be perfect and not pretend, but like I can never show weakness. I can never show like anxiety or forgetfulness or anything like that. I can't show these things because I have to be this shiny.
Isn't that ironic?
It is ironic.
I'm going to be a teacher talking about reality, but I can't quite show the reality.
Exactly. I have this term for it. I call it guru ego, like tennis elbow, like guru ego.
Yeah. I mean, look, I just came off of 13, 14 month sabbatical, right? I came off that sabbatical. I took that sabbatical because I had a pain. It's no longer with me, but a pain condition that was at the level of torturous for the better part of 15 years. Wow. And when that passed, I figured out what was going on, but there was trauma in this body mind built up over these unimaginably difficult, painful time periods, right? At the same time, I was sort of traveling the world and teaching and stuff. And I realized, okay, this needs attention. This needs real attention. I need to stop doing the teaching part so I can attend to this, right? So this, awakening, all this stuff, it doesn't give us a pass on everything. Boy, it can take a lot of suffering away, and immense, and make life so much better. And it doesn't give anybody special status. Boy, if you think it gives you special status, just keep living for a few decades. You'll bump into something that will realize you're on the same status as everybody else. Right? And so, I know that's a big, that's an issue of how you appear to people and, all that kind of stuff. And here I am, right? Here's an example. I did take that year off, and I did attend to what needed to be attended to. Yeah. And I'm really glad I just didn't get stuck in some spiritual idea of who and how I'm supposed to be. And because I never would have done it. Yeah. I realized this is all about being conscious and healing. If this is the thing that shows up. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I see it in that thank you for sharing the personal story about this past the year that you took off, or the sabbatical that you took off. Yeah. So that I would see that on like a more of a macro level. This guru ego, when I see it, it's I don't want to say that it's anybody is immune to it. When I teach meditation classes, if I have lost my train of thought for whatever reason, I won't be like, oh, I lost my train of thought. I'll try to cover it up, I see. I ask my audience, right? Where was I? That's a beauty of live audience. I just ask them, what was I talking about? Doing this online, you can't do that, but I know the experience.
But like, so like there's that on a micro level, and then on
Yeah, yeah,
a macro level, I won't say
yeah.
anybody specifically, but if you see some of the like the people that call themselves gurus or things like
Mhm.
that, then they get stuck in this. It's like that times a million. Like
Mhm.
they get stuck in this thing where they have to present themselves in this like
Mhm.
perfect way, and then you see. I think I heard a conversation between you and Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate,
Yeah,
where he was
yeah,
talking about all the people, all those gurus that had, sexually abused people and
yeah,
been, and all that like kind of like falls out of like this person that's pretending to be like perfect. You know what I mean?
right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And not
So,
being honest about their needs and how to go about that in a wise way. And that if you repress it long enough, things come out in distorted ways.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And the thing is I can see where it comes from, like in those minor moments at like the meditation classes where I'll cover up my like losing my train of thought, for example. It's because
yeah,
I don't want to make people think that this practice is going to make them space out. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Or things like
Yeah,
that. I
I
want to
do.
be a good example.
I do.
But so it's
I
it's
do.
like this
But
it's
a good example is you just being an unabashedly you.
mm,
Right? That's a great example.
yeah,
Honesty and like, hey, this is me, and
yeah,
that's a teaching.
yeah,
That's a teaching.
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah,
debated long and hard, my friend, about like how much do I tell people about what I went through? I
mm,
don't tell them much, mostly because I don't want to scare the hell out of all my students, you know. um, and and yet I thought I need to just not come back from a sabbatical and go like, yeah, I basically had a sabbatical, and wasn't that lovely, and here's all the fun stuff I did. And
mm,
they're like, no, that wouldn't be true.
mm,
That wouldn't be true. So if I lose every student I have, okay, fine, we'll do that. I got this into this to be truthful about the truth, and that's the way it's going to stay. And you're right, there are a lot of sort of just the setup to get lost. Anybody, if you have any kind of, plane of authority, especially authority where people are projecting really nice things on you, it can be really nice just to take all that in, and pretty soon you might start believing the hype a little bit, and I'm not talking about necessarily people with any bad intentions or anything. I'm sure there are some people like that, but I think there's a lot that just kind of miss how perilous this position is and how much on your toes you have to be, and never assume that you're beyond the pitfalls of it.
yeah,
As soon as you think I'm beyond the pitfalls, you've already fallen into one. So, but
yeah,
I have always had in my head, I mean, it rings constantly when my teacher, she told me a few things when she asked me to teach. And one of the things she said, if you ever can't handle the temptations of teaching, get out before you hurt someone.
mm, yeah,
And you
yeah,
can see it still has emotion in my
mm,
voice. That's how important it was to me, because it was also important to her. So, but she was also, she was a human being, and she knew human beings, and she wasn't doing a guru show, or she was a housewife that raised 5 kids and did a damn good job of it, and happened to be really into Zen, and, and got enlightened and everything. But she never lived in those rarefied environments. She taught in her living room.
mm,
And so that's what I absorbed, right? That was my modeling. Like,
mm,
oh, okay. And that integrity that she had, and then all those things are important, because we should never assume that any of us are beyond, well, anything really.
yeah.
And it keeps us safe.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I think that can really help teachers, and people who are meditation teachers or spiritual teachers of any kind. I think it's really important just to realize that guru ego is a thing and it happens to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
to
we are
get it.
at the most, we are human beings with some insight.
Yeah, and it's
That's
good to
it.
yeah, it's I think it's so important to be vulnerable, to be able to share, your own shortcomings, because I think that that also really helps people to be able to connect and to relate and to realize,
Yeah.
like, oh, this is something I can do.
Yes,
I don't
that's
have to be
right.
perfect. I
Oh,
I'm just going to do this practice, or I'm going to listen to this teaching, and I'm going to drop into awareness, or I'm going to rest in awareness,
hmm
whatever it is.
hmm
And it's fine. I can be my human self
Yeah.
with all my flaws and everything, and still be this.
Because that's the material. That's what we're working with, man.
Mhm.
Right? We're not working with our great scintillating wisdom in spiritual practice. We're dealing with our confusion, with our hangups, with whatever arises. It's about being there for all that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
So I want to ask you, I know that we were planning on around an hour and a half, but I have one last question. Do you
Fine.
have a few minutes?
Of
Okay, so
course.
this is about active versus passive ways of approaching uh enlightenment or
Yeah.
awakening. Oh, wait, I have one question before that, sorry. Because you
Sure.
actually just said you were just talking about this, the housewife that was your teacher, the five that raised five kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Marvelous.
my mom also raised five kids, and one of the closest to enlightened people that I've ever met.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
meanwhile, she's like, she doesn't do any, Zen or anything like that. That's just how she is. She's just tapped into that somehow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
If
think
you're
a
going
lot
to
of,
raise kids even moderately well, you've got to get some handle on selflessness. You know,
yeah, yeah,
at least being able to suspend it. That's part of parenting for sure.
yeah,
And that's a
yes.
spiritual practice, right? Even though we don't call it that in that context, but it is,
Mm.
right?
Selflessness, yeah,
Yeah,
selflessness, absolutely. And that I think there's a lot of people that think that awakening and enlightenment are these like very high and mighty things, I guess you could call it. And one of the things that I've seen, I think the biggest misconception I think that I've seen is that it's like only reserved for a few people in a generation. I've heard people
right.
say that specifically.
Yeah,
Like I've heard like in my travels in Nepal, I ran into people that said that, and in my
yeah,
travels in Laos, and like the random, like different cultures sometimes have that idea, and that trickles into the general population, that
yep,
awakening and enlightenment is only for very, very, very special people. But like
right.
I can see that you don't have that view, so
Mm-mm.
I wanted to get you to clarify that here for our audience. I think it's, what do you think about that?
Well, it doesn't fit my case. I
Yeah.
was a pretty ordinary guy when I got into all this. I was like a competitive bike racer that would run over your grandma to get over the line first. Like that's that's where I was coming from. That's where I started from. I wasn't some like incredibly evolved being, and yet I had this almost unimaginably strong. Wasn't even a desire. It's just like I had to know. It just came up literally one day, and so um, there is always a balance with it is a kind of internal balance. Like if we're pushing too hard, we're burning a lot of energy and not getting anywhere. Believe me, I specialized in that when I was young, pushing way too hard. If you're in Zen and your teachers are going, whoa, kid, you might not want to meditate that much, you're pushing hard, right? And people would hear that, which as they have, how hard I push, they think that's how I need to be. But no, I had to push hard until that just sort of imploded. Not an easy way to go. It did because I kept going, but then you say, oh, that wasn't, maybe it was necessary for me, maybe, but it's not innately necessary in any way. And I wasn't special. I'm still not. I'm still a guy that likes to go run in the mountains for, 5 or 6 hours at a time when I can. I'll do all these kind of sort of crazy physical things too. So yeah, this is
But
about our true nature, right? Everybody's got it, not the special people.
yeah,
Everybody. It's just like, do you know it or not? Have you realized it or not?
mm,
That's it.
yeah, and that's, they say like everything is the Buddha, everyone is the Buddha. It's,
Yeah.
yes, so that's all our true nature already. but do you feel like everyone has the capacity to realize it, or do you feel like it's only a small percentage of the population that has the capacity
No,
to
I
realize?
don't think it's necessarily a small percentage. Um, we get into a territory here that can be a little philosophical. Like in one sense, yeah, philosophically, everybody has the capacity. But when we get out of that realm into the human realm, yeah, everybody does have the capacity, but do they have the desire? Do they have the interest? What's their life situation? You and I aren't running around for our lives in like Ukraine or something, right? Just trying to survive. So yes, it's, everybody is innately possesses 100% measure of the Buddha nature. And some, whether it's situations, lifestyle, upbringing, whatever, it can be easier or more difficult for different people. Again, like everything else in life. And when we get that spirituality is not unlike everything else, it's really, really helpful. Like in everything, can everybody be a gold medal Olympian? No, they can't, even if they wanted to be. Most people don't even really want to be. But no, they can't. But there's a difference here of that and something like, say, like athletics, like that. Very few people can ever achieve that. But doesn't have anything to do with true nature, right? That has a lot to do with innate talent and drive. And so it's not an easy question to answer. Innately, philosophically, yes. Boots on the ground, given everybody's life experience and where they are, I would never say it's not possible. I haven't seen that. And I've seen people that have just come from, oh my God, the backgrounds I've heard people come from, just unimaginable, like things I couldn't have dreamed of. And I've seen people come through that stuff, and I've met some people that are just so bright and clear and shining and beautiful. And you think, good Lord, they would have never fit the description of somebody that had even a remote chance at this, given their life. And yet I've seen it many, many times. So,
I think probably the reason I ask is there's a certain, I don't want to call it even a stigma or something, of talking about these things, awakening, enlightenment. I think people sometimes shy away from it because they think, oh, that idea that it's only for special people. It's
right.
like you're talking about yourself as a special person. It's like, oh, is that ego? Like it sounds like ego.
Right.
And then it people shy away from talking about it because I think of that specialness that is ascribed to it. That you have to be super special to have that. But I think if we would talk about it more like you do, the way that I think when you talk, maybe you're not explicit about it, but when you talk, I always get the impression that, awakening and enlightenment are normal, natural things that anyone can experience, or maybe not anyone. Like most people who at least come to the spiritual questions and are interested in it, you can experience it rather than it being some high and mighty thing. It's like you can barely even talk about it without making yourself sound special.
Right. And one of the biggest barriers we have in spirituality to awakening is all the centuries of teaching around specialness. And then when we think of enlightened beings, they usually got some fancy robe on so they look like a monarch. Which hits some gene in us, apparently, because it happens all over the world, right? So they look like kings and queens. And then we think, well, that's the model, right? But that's just the person who got up there on stage. There's probably 150 or more that were never dumb enough to get on stage. They thought, are you kidding?
Yeah.
All that trouble? I think not. So I'm joking a little bit, but I do think the images we've come with of rarity and specialness, and even the way it's why, I put my Buddhist robes away and everything long time ago first year that I taught, I had my Buddhist robes on. And it's fine. I mean, I love the tradition and people that really are dedicated to upholding that. That's part of that. It's part of the ritual. But yeah, I just more available, more down to earth we can make this, because all those centuries of rarity, thinking it's the rarest thing in the world, that hasn't helped us. It's a big barrier. It's one of the earliest things I saw teaching. If I could get someone to actually consider that it's actually possible for them, that was immense. Just getting people to go, it's possible. Oh, it is? Really? I mean, I'm not pursuing something I'll never achieve, right? Just opening the mind, like, yes, it is. Stop thinking it's not. For some people, it's hard to let go of that projection stuff because, having a monarch to worship and all that stuff, that also touches something deep in us that can be profound. And I don't want to just casually dismiss it, because there are those times where some of that projection can sometimes work for a limited period of time, but boy, is it a dangerous territory to be putting energy in.
I don't know.
My fallback is ordinary person. Let's start there, where we all are.
Yeah, I mean, I heard you talking, maybe it was to Oprah, I think it was, about Jesus being a revolutionary, and
was
how he pointed at stuff that he said, no, that's not good. I don't know, maybe we should say maybe that's not the best thing to do that monarch thing that goes along with the guru ego, maybe that's just not a great way of doing the whole spirituality thing.
I don't think it's necessary. Wouldn't it be interesting if all, our spiritual teachers came and, I don't know. I mean, I've taught a lot of times in blue jeans and I'll always wear a collared shirt because I do have a sense of you should dress with some respect when you're doing this. So I do have that, maybe a little bit of conditioning, but
my lack of collar is not a disrespect to you. I just wear this all the time.
No, I don't take it that way at all. You could have a tank top on and I wouldn't feel disrespected.
It's an Om symbol, you see. So it's
I see. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
But just imagine, a world where the spiritual teacher almost, that they didn't dress any more fancy than a college professor or something. I just think there might be less projected barriers to work through.
And less ego around it, probably too.
Probably so, yeah. Because if when you dress like a monarch, it's much easier to act like one.
Yeah,
and people around you act like one. So it's a balance between retaining some real respect, right, and some real I have a great devotion for the tradition that I came from. I have great devotion. That doesn't stop me from making my own decisions about what I think is best or to do as a teacher. But anyway, it will be an interesting day when all the spiritual teachers just sort of show up in more casual attire and just look like everybody else.
I think it's happening. I think
it is too.
There's always going to be those ones that want to grab the attention in a certain way, or present
there is. And there's something to be said for, notwithstanding what you just said, which is absolutely true. But I do think there's also something to be said for ritual, communal, things that bring community and ritual together. And there's often somebody at the head of that. And I think is a whole different subject, which we won't get into. But I think it's a really interesting thing of what will religions of the future look like. The ones of the past, almost all of them have been based in stories. But people don't tend to believe stories so much. So, and what will it all? And yes, we can do this thing, even what I do. Like, I'm really conscious that the way that I'm teaching has a limitation. I don't have a structure. I don't have a place that we can do those kind of rituals, that community forms and bonds that get made and all that human stuff that's been important about religions, I don't think in the end we're just going to be casually dismiss all that. which is, which is, I think we'll have to, because it's such a part of us, that, that archetypal, mythological aspect of all of us, as well as the communal aspect. But I do think we can do that without nearly the amount of pomp and circumstance that happens around it.
Yeah, I agree.
We can do good rituals while looking like ordinary people, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So here's the last question that I was trying to get to a few minutes ago when you said
Yeah.
about that, everybody has this true nature. We're all a Buddha already. And like what we were talking about before, where we're all one, this is all oneness. We already are that. We just have to realize it. So the question is, if we already are that, then, and why do we even have to realize it? Like,
We don't.
what's the point?
We don't have to.
Yes.
So let me give you my quick frame, okay?
Uh-huh.
My frame is what's actually going on at the deepest level in all of us, is whatever name you could call it, pure consciousness or life itself, just life. Life, when we have that spiritual instinct, that is life endeavoring to become conscious of itself in us, right? It's almost like it's using you to become conscious of itself. That's my story. That's my frame. I don't want people to take that with total concrete reality, but that's pretty close to my experience, right? And so from that perspective, it's just a different game from that perspective, because then you're almost like you're trying to help along true nature. You're trying to help life to become more conscious. It's not just strictly 100% personal. There's something that you're participating with.
Yeah, but why does it even need to be conscious of itself?
It doesn't need to be. That's just its instinct. Like we have an instinct to breathe and our heart to beat. We don't have to remember, fortunately, to beat our hearts, but there's some mechanism in there that beats it. I do think if we just look at life, even in a historical perspective over vast periods of time, evolution isn't just, the changing and evolution of species, but part of that evolution is consciousness, right? And here we are, human beings, the most conscious species that we know in terms of self-consciousness. It doesn't mean that we act as nice as all the other beings. Self-consciousness is a pretty perilous thing for life to put in any life form, right? It really is. It's quite a thing. And yet it's like the greatest blessing and the greatest curse at the same time, right? The moment you become self-aware, it's like, oh, I'm self-aware. But it's also like, oh, I'm self-aware. Look how much there is to explore. So I don't think of it in terms of like what needs or should or wise or what, like that's our human conventions, right? That we're putting off on to the deeper reality. It just seems to me the deeper reality has to me anyway, a pretty obvious instinct towards more and more and more and more consciousness. Wow. And here we are. We're the tip of that instinct to become more and more conscious, right?
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Thank you so much. I know that your time is limited, so I wanna. Do you have time for one more question?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not in a rush, my friend.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So my phone is going to die at some point. So I don't know when that's going to be, but so, okay. Meditation magazine is called Meditation Magazine, right? Not like Awakening Magazine. It's about meditation. And then we also run a meditation teacher training course where there's people learning to teach meditation. It's all about meditation. So when you talk a lot of the time, you're talking about an effortless awareness where doing anything is going to actually prevent you from realizing that you already are being, like, so my question for you
not
is,
necessarily.
So yeah, okay. So my question is like, I know that you've spent a lot of time meditating in the past.
Yeah,
You were in Zen and all that, and you described sometimes that as that time as failure. But my
yeah,
question is like, if you're trying to help somebody to realize these things,
yeah.
the being oneness and everything, all that, the awakening, the enlightenment. If you're trying to help somebody realize that, do you start with meditation,
Yeah.
or do you say, no, that's doing too much? Just drop everything and just be.
No, I start with meditation. Yeah,
Okay.
I start because I want to. Well, number one, it's just really good for people. It's just good for us, right? To be sitting and meditating and stuff like that. It's good in general. It's good spiritually, and it's also a good foundation, which in the modern era isn't paid enough attention to. It used to be this. You'd undergo a decade or two of preliminary practices before you even got access to hearing non-dual teachings, for good's sake. Now we don't do that. That's, in one sense, that's really good. But in another sense, you have a lot of people coming into this with zero foundation.
Hmm. That's interesting. And that
Yeah,
can,
and the consequences of that are vividly playing themselves out in the spiritual marketplace.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I
I mean, well, yeah.
do you think
Oh,
of like spiritual bypassing? I could see that as being a consequence of that, where if you just jump into oneness without really getting in touch with yourself, well, with the human part of yourself at least,
yeah.
then
I'd be
it,
okay with that. Go to oneness if the opportunity presents itself, but we'll circle back and include your humanness in it at some point, or we'll include the humanness right from the beginning, which is kind of what the version that I like to do. But I think meditation is a hugely powerful tool, and admittedly, the way that I teach it, it can be prone to some confusion, and I try to dispel that whenever I can. But that effortless kind of allow everything to be all those sort of pointers of just being. We could think of that as that's sort of like the North Star. Your mind will never be able to pull that off, right? Your ego will not be able to pull it off. But that's a direction, right? Not direction like we're going somewhere, but
Mhm.
because most meditators, when they learn, they're doing anything but that. Right? They're very sincere, but their meditation becomes just another means through which the ego is trying to control experience. So I want to get away from that as fast as possible. Let's not try to control experience. On the other hand, I think it's important to bring intention to meditation. Absolutely. I'm not a fan of just sit there and do nothing. And if you wander, do nothing and keep doing nothing and nothing and not like, if you're at the point where you can do that, really, you're in a deep state of samadhi, right?
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, which almost nobody can when they start, or maybe ever, who knows, let's start with something else. Bring your intention. As I say, let's have the 3 commitments. Be still. Don't move your body every time you want to move, right? And every time your mind wants to move, because then it's hard for your mind to settle down. You can't make your mind be still, but you can let your body be still. So as long as we're sitting, let's commit to that. Let's commit to being still, because that's part of the practice, right? And then when we do that also, let's also commit to when we get lost in our mind, that we just come back, whether it's to your breath, whether it's to awareness, if you have enough sense, whether it's to a sense of presence, whatever it is. But let's really, really commit to that for whatever. If we're sitting for 10 minutes, let's do it for 10 minutes. If we're sitting for an hour, but really commit to that, right? And the other thing, the last thing is also, let's commit to noticing the quiet spaces inside. Just noticing them. Don't try to hold on or prolong them. Just, oh yeah, there is peace there, even though I feel some turmoil maybe. Oh, okay. Now that's the basics, right? But those three are commitments. You notice they all are exercising intention. And a radical non-dualist would come say, who's going to do that? Right. And if I had it close enough, I'd grab my stick and I'd go, whack. Who feels pain? Let's get beyond the damn abstractions, shall we? You know what I mean?
Yes. That's funny.
So yeah, meditation, I'm a real fan of, but I'm also realized it's a kind of it's a koan. It's a living paradox, like not struggling, not making effort, but exercising intention. Whoa. As my teacher used to say, it's about effortless effort. It's not just effortless. That's not enough, because then you can just drift. If it's all effort, then you're tight and your ego's trying to direct everything. But there's something in the middle there. There's something, your effortlessness to feel that you do have some peace and stability inside you innately from the beginning. And you're using some discipline because you're humble. Oh, this mind wanders. It's like a little child, poor little thing. And here, I'm just going to kind of help reintroduce it to life, to reality. Just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's this so I'm using both of those intentions, effortless and effort.
And so you mentioned that it's kind of like a koan, but you're also kind of like teaching yourself how to bring your attention back and things like that. So there's two ways I could think of meditation from your perspective, I guess, or I guess it's pretty much my perspective as well. That the meditation can lead to that dropping of all doing in, I guess, two ways that you're describing. So one is the koan, where it's like a koan is basically intentionally supposed to frustrate you until you give up. So like exhaust your mind, to make you give up. That is a very powerful way to awaken. I just in Thailand, when I spent some time in that monastery in Thailand, like I was in this silent meditation for 7 days, struggling against my mind, and eventually I got so tired from that, like literally couldn't struggle anymore. And then in that moment of giving up, that's when.
That's right.
So giving up is one very powerful way.
Yeah.
And
but you can't necessarily just preemptively give up.
Right, exactly. So
you can't do an end run around the challenge of it all.
Right. So you could say that meditation in one way is like intentionally a frustrating practice, intentionally to get you to that point of giving up, or maybe both. You could say that, like you were saying, you're training your mind to come back. You're training your mind to come back. And then over time, you're preparing yourself for, like, you're preparing your consciousness to be able to sustain those states of being in contact with reality.
And withstand them.
Yeah.
To literally withstand them. To just, because they can be very, very strong. So there's a kind of stability that meditation is good at. If it goes right, kind of it creates a kind of psychic stability. So when something, opens up that's just kind of mind blowing, that there's a stability deep in there. That's very useful.
Yeah.
So meditation's really good for that kind of stability too.
Yeah. So would you say that when you start people out with meditation, are you doing it mainly with the intention of it being a koan that gets people to frustrate themselves and finally give up, or as a way to get them to develop that mindfulness and stability and stuff like that, or both?
Both. Okay. Both at the same time.
Nice.
Yeah. And we can do both, right? It's not necessarily easy, but it's also not necessarily complicated.
That's true. I thought of those two things before I asked the question. I thought of them in some way to be contradictory. Like you're having the slow awakening of bringing your mind back, cultivating that kind of mindfulness, versus that sudden awakening of the koan. But really, they're not contradictory. They're complementary. They can go together. You cultivate that. You eventually come into contact with reality. When you break, sometimes you just come into very stark contact with reality, and then you can sustain it because you've cultivated the mindfulness.
Yes, that's the theory.
Yeah,
and
that
and
is
it
the theory.
yeah, and it often helps in that regard. It's not perfect, but it certainly. But we can be, say if we're doing what I'll call, say, like meditative inquiry, right? How to drop that question in, right? Who am I? And don't think about it, and let it just drop you into the mystery, right? Into what you don't know, into just opening to that. And then as you're doing that, at any point in time, maybe your mind drifts and you're thinking about yesterday's breakfast or something, right? And you go, oh, I'm thinking, oh, yesterday. Oh, yeah. Here, let me just bring attention back here and just put it back in this centered place of the mystery of I. You're just like, then you're bringing back to the mystery, but you're wanting to know, but you're not just, and it's useful to have some trust, right? Like if I pose the question, I don't have to pose it like a machine, like every 2 seconds, who am I? Just drop it in, feel where it takes you. And then at some point you'll sense the question re-arising. What am I? But don't let a single one of those words move through your mind disembodied. So how does that feel in your body? Where does that register? Am, that great question, am, I. Wow, what a weird thing to start to realize I don't know who I am. Wow, how weird is that? And yet it's a meditative act, right? It's focused, it's calm, but it's always connected with experience, right?
Yeah.
And then we're also building a kind of foundation at the same time. We're doing inquiry where we could open at any moment. Like you cannot predict that. Often it happens when we least would think it would happen. Like you were a good example of that. I was a good example of that, right? Right before my first crack open, I felt like I was a million miles away in total frustration, despondent, defeat. That wasn't the preemptive state that I planned would help me with awakening. Not that everybody needs to have that. A lot of people don't go through that kind of thing, but some of us do. And it's just a way to say, we don't know what's the indications that we're getting closer, really.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons we would have a good teacher, because teachers can kind of spot things if they're good that we can't really spot for ourselves.
Yeah. I read when you had that first awakening experience of that sort of breaking of the very intense work that you were doing, that spiritual work that it finally gave up and broke, and then you had the Kundalini rush. Right. That was, so that Kundalini rush, I didn't have that in my Thailand experience. I've only been able to experience that by cultivating it intentionally through Kundalini meditations and stuff. And I wanted to get your.
Be careful.
Yeah, no, it's fun. I love it.
It's fun. It's fun. But I mean, I'm not saying don't do it, but you're the driving and follow your own instinct. And I've met a lot of people that have come to me that did Kundalini, and then it really exploded open. And then they don't know what to do with it. And the person leading the workshop or the teacher doesn't really know what to do with them. And it's like, whoa. It's like, maybe something like Kundalini is best left to open in its own time, in its own way. If you force the jar open, it's different than if it happens in its own time. It really is. It is different.
Yeah,
so we got to respect the process, and our own humanity.
Yeah,
because these shifts can be immense. They're not always. Sometimes they're just like, oh, I'll be darned.
Yeah,
I've seen people like that. Same realization. I'll be darned, really? Wow.
Hmm.
And someone next to them says similar experience, and they're just like, oh, they're like struck, semi-functional for a week, And it's back to our human makeup, how we react to any experience, right? It's different from one person to the next.
Yeah, but like for me, when I feel it, it's just a fun, nice, beautiful feeling,
Yeah, it's great.
but I wonder, like, why is it even important in the awakening process? Like, it feels great, but is it necessary? Is it, you know what I
It
mean?
No, it's not necessary to focus on, that's for sure. I wasn't focusing on Kundalini at all
Mm.
whatsoever, but it's often a part. There's almost always some energetic component to awakening. It might be very, very, very light where you wouldn't even think of Kundalini, but a heightened sense of energy and, all of that to, something that's
Mm.
way, way more than that. But here's my quick take. Again, this is like I wouldn't take it as concrete, absolute truth, but it's like my take of Kundalini. It's from what I've seen, my own experience, but also with hundreds of other people that I've watched go through this, is my sense of what Kundalini is when we really breach the barrier between the conscious and unconscious. That energy, that's the immense energy that's housed in the unconscious. And it just floods out through the whole body mind.
Wow.
Right. And and the reason it's so different for different people of how it unfolds, because it depends what's in your unconscious. Right. And so and our conscious mind is like a pinprick compared to the unconscious mind. One way of thinking of spirituality is actually doing a dive into the unconscious, but actually not going deeper than the personal unconscious, deeper than the collective unconscious, right to the very ground of being. Because the ground of being is pulling us. Well, I won't get into that. The whole
Yes.
It's using you to become conscious of itself. That may be somewhat disquieting for some people, but remember, it is you too, right? So watch out for the separations that creep in, and you think, oh, something's happening against my will. It's all one.
It's all part of that experience, that just flow of experience.
It's part of that experience, right?
Oneness.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I would love to keep talking to you forever, honestly, but my wife keeps calling me, so I think she needs to.
Well, we definitely want to pay attention to that, my friend.
Yes,
All
the
right.
whole love thing is important.
So
So
it is.
thank you so much, Adyashanti. It's been amazing talking to you. Watching your videos for so many years, and now being here talking to you, it just feels like so natural and so beautiful. And I'm eternally grateful for your teachings and the things that this human has learned from them, and allowed this human to merge into the oneness from time to time. So thank you so much for that. And just where can people, if people want to connect more with you, with your teachings, where should they look?
Adyashanti.org is our website. It has everything, where, when I'll be teaching stuff. Lots of free stuff, actually. A lot of free teachings on there too. So that's where you can find out anything that I'm doing is
Adyashanti.org. It's yes, it's got everything and nothing, all of it, the one.
And I didn't create any of it. Boy, do I have some talented, beautiful people that I'm just the tip of the iceberg, man. I got the iceberg behind me is beautiful and dedicated and wonderful. So
I'm sure you created the content, at least the content.
I just sit up and talk. That's all I do.
Oh man, I can't wait till I get to do that. For now, I'm doing everything, all the tech and all that. Well,
bless your heart, my friend.
Yeah.
Nice to be with you, Kevin. Thank you for your kind words. And it was really delightful speaking with you too. I really enjoyed you.
And I'll send you, thank you so much. And I'll send you copies of the Awakening issue when it comes out.
That'd be fun.
I really hope you enjoy them.
Cool. I'm sure I will. All right.
Have a beautiful day, Adyashanti, and everybody watching.
All right. Yeah.
Bye.
Bless you all.